think that's it, yeah.
I don't know, Todd. Todd, you hear me?
You know you're watching.
Yeah, you're on.
Okay, good. All right, well, I'd like to call this study session to order. And we are lucky to have Lynette Lacey with us today. If you're not familiar with Lynette, she has facilitated strategic plans and other conversations with area nonprofits, private business, I think the chamber, and the city in the past, and the county. So she also lives in Hutchinson and is deeply engaged in the community, so has her finger on the pulse of a lot of things. She's going to be walking us through this conversation this evening, and I will remind the council that the goal today is not to make decisions on how we allocate these funds, but to come up with a process that is very transparent to the public, very fair, very objective, and where the best ideas can rise to the top. We do have a few people, a few other stakeholders in the room besides council, so I didn't know if you wanted to take a minute to introduce yourselves and which organization you're with.
I'm Lisa Gleason, Executive Director for United Way of Reno County, also was a part of the ARPA task force, and so I'm just here to be an observer today.
My name is Denise Dillon. I'm the Community Impact Coordinator for the United Way of Reno County, and Chair Kay Reddy.
I'm Heather Faulkner. I'm just a local child care worker who works on the system, is on part of the systems, I'm not going to have her name, but the system group something. It's trying to help the child care problem in Reno County. So I'm just here to listen.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lynette.
All right. Welcome, everybody. I know you have already had a long day of at least one meeting. So I was told we would have 2 to 3 hours. Is that what you were told? Or?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Why not? I've already been here 4 hours today.
We can make it a full day. Yeah, we won't do that. All right, so what I handed out to you was an agenda for the time this evening. And I'm just going to briefly go over it, just so you kind of, I always like to know the lay of the land, what's coming ahead of me. So I'm just going to highlight the big points on the agenda. And as Jade said, the purpose of tonight, and I'm going to ask you to kind of share some thoughts on what you hope to get to at the end of our time tonight. You know, what's that success? If you were to say, walk out of here tonight and say, gosh, that was a successful meeting, what would have happened? So I'm going to give you some time to think about that and share that with the group. So we're going to go over some of the ground rules, and I'm going to ask that if you want anything added, please feel free to. I know these conversations can get kind of passionate, so these are things I know you have not that you've heard before. Listening, obviously, and I'm going to say it in a way that you listen to other people without debating them. Listen for their opinion and not listening to counteract their opinion. That criticize ideas, not individuals. Commit to learning, not debating. Avoid blame, speculation, and inflammatory language. Allow everyone a chance to speak, and even if you don't see somebody speaking and they haven't spoken for quite a while, making sure that you don't fill up that space, allow that space to exist, and let those folks get their voices heard. And I'm going to ask this one especially that you give me permission to hold you to the ground rules. Just a nod. Either way. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to this, which will be to talk about, I want you to share with me tonight what your expectations are for this evening. Then I'm going to lay out some information, all the stuff that you guys have in your heads that may be ready to explode after reading today, but just the kinds of things that I want to refresh you about some of the things that have happened, that deal with the ARPA funding and other things that the city staff have done. And then finally, we're going to jump into the developing the decision-making matrix. And I'm going to introduce one to you that has just my thoughts, some ideas. I just would prefer to not start with a blank sheet and say, okay, the things that, you know, help you decide. So these items are, you can take them or throw them out, and we'll rewrite new ones. This is just an example. So when we get to that, we'll talk more. All right, so expectations of the time we have together this evening. In one to two phrases, each of you council members can have 1 to 2 phrases. They don't even have to be full sentences. They might even be 3 or 4 words just thrown together. That you would share your expectations for the meeting tonight. So at whenever we finish, 8:39, what do you hope to have done? Then I'm going to give you 2 to 3 minutes to share that with the group. You don't have to give a lot of background, just kind of tell what you've written down. I'm going to give you some paper if you need it. Okay, and I will record this. Because that will begin with giving me a sense of where each of you are and how far we need to go to get to that consensus about a process at the end of the evening. All right. Questions about the agenda? Things that aren't on there that you think we really need to have on there too?
Do we need to discuss timelines?
Well, we can include that in the next steps. I will put that down today. Thank you. Is that for?
Yeah, for application process or whatever comes out of this.
Okay. All right. Anything else that needs to be on this? So I'm going to move to expectations for this evening. 1 to 2 phrases. What do you hope to have accomplished by the time you get out of here tonight? You can write you some fun little green paper. Spring, right? So I'll time you and let you know when there's about 30 seconds left. Is there any?
Jake, was there another one in there?
Nope, there's, let's see. I can see there's a warm one in here.
Sorry, guys, we're bringing out hot water on the same day.
I share one of mine. I have a drink out of this one.
Sir, you want to have water?
I'm fine.
We're not going to be judged on our writing skills, are we?
No, as long as you can read it, so I can write it up here. You're good. All right, you'll wrap up your thoughts. It's okay, there's no judgment. minutes, just tell me what you have on your pads, and whoever wants to go first, jump in, please.
I put down, I'd like to see clear parameters to vet opportunities from the community in a way that they can be shared and used by community partners to pre-qualify opportunities in the spirit of efficiency.
If I don't get it right, just please correct me and I will change. So the clear parameters so partners can read and qualify for,
Well, if a community partner's approached with an idea, they can say, I know this is going to meet their expectations, and it doesn't have to come in front of us. Because it's clear on what's expected, and what we're looking for opportunities.
okay? Thank you, John.
I have, how do we specifically allocate the money? Like, how much to be used for what?
Okay. Ms. Berry?
I am.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I thought we were going in this.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Application process and timeline. What and how does someone apply? And how do we get the word out for people to apply?
Did I get it all, Sarah? I feel like you had three things, but I think I only got two.
No, it's application process and timeline, and then the how and what to apply. You know, like,
How to get word out for people to, okay. Great.
I just really think we need to make it a simple process that's clear, kind of goes back to John too.
Okay.
Something clear and precise.
Okay.
Okay, mine is to be fair as possible.
Thank you. Jay?
Very similar to what has already been said, clear guidelines for the community. An eye toward equity. And then similar to what I said earlier, just a process and scoring rubric that's objective, clear, equitable, and prioritizes the areas identified by the community during the ARPA task force. We really want to make sure that we are responsive to what we learned during that process.
Feels like I left one thing out. Eye toward equity and process and scoring rubric to make sure we are responsive to what we learned in the ARPA process. Is that it? All right, so we have our work here cut out for us. And my goal is to get to all of those by the time we adjourn. So, I've got some information, which I'm sure you already have, and you've probably seen it many times, so I'm going to pass it out again, that about the local ARPA recommendations. I'll just pass it around, you can take one of it. It's front and back on that one. And then the second set is also, they're also front and back. This has not only the local guidelines, or the local information, but it also has the Fed's description of what their areas of funding, where you can spend the Fed's money. So, I'm sure you've all seen it.
Thank you.
So the one with the coloring on it is back in front too. Trying to see. So just be a point of reference if you need to look at it as we're having this conversation. Now, that's only one piece, I know, of everything you have to consider as you move through and develop this decision-making process. So you also have city infrastructure needs, correct? I mean, you know what some of those things are. I'm sure that list is not short. Also, city staff recommendations. I understand there has been some work that has happened by city staff. So there are a lot of different buckets of information, and that includes your constituents who heard about this, who may be talking to you about it. So I don't want to assume that the ARPA information is the only thing you're going to be looking at, right? All right. Now we're going to move down to the developing the decision matrix. So as I said, I'm going to pass out a sample and I'm going to talk about it briefly here. That I overwore my contact yesterday watching that KU game. So I can't see close up. I have to go through my glasses. So I apologize. Okay, so this is really going to be a tool that will develop your priorities for this process. And you listed some of those expectations already for tonight. I would like to remind you that looking through those ground rules again, that this is a time when we may all agree, or you may all agree in the first 15 minutes of conversation, and we'll just move on. But you may not, and that's okay, right? This is our time to work to move towards consensus about developing this decision-making process. So we're going to be developing factors that you need to consider. You've started listing some of them already, like clarity, clear guidelines, if you're a couple of different times, clear parameters. So that may be one of the factors you need to look at. Whether, and it's kind of parameters and clarity are really two-sided in the grant process, right? So it's not just clarity when you announce the grants and write the proposals here, or write the decision-making matrix, but it's also clarity from the grant writer, from those partners who are writing the proposals back to you, or whoever ends up receiving this. We'll be looking at two things that we'll develop by the end of the evening. The factors you're going to consider and the criteria by which you're going to judge if the proposals, if the decision, one of the factors actually on this list is whether you're going to make that decision or you're going to develop criteria and send it off to maybe a partner organization who do actually do the grant. That's one of the factors to consider in this conversation tonight. All right, so I'm gonna hand this out, and I know I said this is not set in stone, this is an example of what I'm talking about as we move through this conversation tonight. The most important part of tonight, in my mind, is building consensus, hearing what your fellow council members have to say, compromise, and moving forward with a process that will help you make decisions that have a great impact on this community now and in the future. All right, so I'll talk as you're looking. So the factors that I was talking about, and I really just listed these as I was thinking about if I were in your chairs, what would I be considering? You know, you want a collaborative group approaching you, or do you want individual organizations, or is it okay to have both? Okay. Do you want to go deep with, I put families, but it could be deep with one content area, like deep with mental health, deep with childcare, deep with economic development, in a single, more narrow focus, or do you want it to be broader, community-wide? Okay. So maybe not just children, families with children, but maybe you'd like to focus on housing, which affect all kinds of families, right? Individuals and family members. City staff recommendations, ARPA priorities, city infrastructure needs, short-term recovery, right? So things that are going to fix stuff now, and then we have to fix that the same thing again in 10 years. Or are you going to focus more on long-term strategic ideas? So that in 25 to 30 years, you set the groundwork here as your council to have more of a long-term impact in the community. And I mentioned this last one already, which was council makes decision, or you give guidelines and ship it off to another partner organization who will actually run the grant process. Questions about the ones that I've listed here are what I mean by factors. Are those examples enough to help you think through this, or no?
Are there, I think there's 2 or 3 just, not even, I wouldn't put them in the decision-making matrix as much, but they are just like the timeline.
Yeah.
It's something we have to work with, we have to decide. Hey, at some point, the money has to be allocated, are we going to have a due date, and we have to have applications in.
Right.
I think there's some just generic guidelines to go over that aren't really up to interpretation as much. But then there are some very primary factors, like are we going to have an idea of a percentage of funds? Are we going to just say, hey, there's a big kitty, and we're going to just, anyone can pull from that kitty, whether it's city or community or what, or are we going to try to say, we need to have a strategy on holding back funds or deciding how much we're willing to spend in the first year. We want to wait to see how spark funds are allocated before we spend funds, so we don't throw money into something to find out there's another funding mechanism later on. And I would consider that a waste of the opportunity. I think there's some primary factors to discuss before we get into actually deciding how we're going to handle particular opportunities.
Yes, and we're not going to talk about particular opportunities in the sense of...
How would we judge a particular opportunity?
Right. So absolutely, the allocation of the funds could mean percentages, just like you said, and how much we allocate. And those are what I would call operational guidelines and factors. So the timelines for application process, due dates, and how you distribute the funds from percentage to when and how much to allocate, whether you spread it over 5 years, or they have to be expended in 2026, is that right, Jeff?
They have to be encumbered by 2024, though.
Okay, so meeting all those things I would call operational guidelines, but those are very important to get to, yes.
Are those before we get into how we...
I would say no.
And then the only reason I ask is because I would
What?
Some things I would tweak a little bit based on the operation guidelines. So if we were looking at, I don't know, let's say we had an operation guideline based on the timeline. And it was a need that came up that, hey, there could be, there's talk of at the state level of spark funds being used for this, but it hasn't been allocated yet. We don't want to allocate these funds yet if we think the state's going to pay for something like this. But then we also have that timeline to work with on our own allocation. There's going to be some juggling, I think, on the timeline on how we spend the money wisely.
But we do know that the state is allocating in 4 categories: connectivity, modernization or technology, or IT and other infrastructure, health, and education. So those are the 4 areas. They've already allocated what they're going to economic development, through base grant, through.
Can you give me those names?
Yeah, connectivity, modernization, healthcare, and education.
So then my question is just a question. Would we tend to grade an opportunity lower if there's funds like this out there to pay for it rather than using our local funds for it?
Well, I mean, they're probably going to have a competitive, I know, at least on the broadband front, they're going to have a competitive rate. So it depends on if we want to take our chances or if we want to spend risky.
So one of the things I think, when I look at this, and I know this is just an example, but I think it's something that we need to talk about just to set off right at the beginning, is, are we gonna use 50% in-house and 50% out-house? So when you come down to council makes decisions, / gives your guidelines to partner to make decisions, I would think that 50% I wouldn't mind if 50% was allocated out for the grant writer for some of the social. And we had 50% that was council makes decisions that was used for infrastructure. And I think we need to talk about that right off the bat so that we kind of know that, I believe that 50% needs to be used for infrastructure and it would just go through the regular council meetings. And then the other 50% would be given guidelines to a partner that would then use the rubric that we're trying to create tonight.
And that actually is a factor to consider. So I'm going to add that as a factor to consider right up front, because you're absolutely right, I think, Sarah, because when you look at impact, when you do 50% for more immediate needs and 50% for maybe more strategic long-term needs, or how are you going to allocate that to cities? It still needs to be strategic and long-term. You can't use it for short-term needs.
I think it's going to be 2 different rubrics.
We could be a second, yeah. But I think that's a factor that needs to be decided, because then you're going to look at the impact, right? So if you want to have the greatest impact in this community, and your sense of impact is 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, not the first 5 years, then you would rate that, if you were an advocate of impact, you would give that a much higher rating to do, not do the 50%.
I guess I was kind of hoping that the 50% that we keep for infrastructure, we would allocate that to the city manager and city and the city department heads and it would just go through
Normal
channels, and then the 50%, other 50% is what we really need to kind of focus on building that equitable rubric that would then go through a grant process.
Right.
Where we weight heavy on the 3 things that were identified. So like childcare would get the highest weight, and then the next one down, housing, would get the, so if you like childcare, the 5, housing's the 4, the 3, so it had different weights, but then if the other one, housing, had a bigger, like you said, legacy or impact, it could outweigh something but I also think that we need to talk about, and I know that you touched on this, is when we're allocating the funds, is it gonna be something that can operate after the grant money is gone? Like, we can't have, like, start something that can only work if we have to subsidize it later on. So it has to be self-sustaining, it needs to just be startup costs, a startup bump. We can't throw money at something that's just gonna break as soon as the money's gone.
Okay.
Because these ARPA funds are just a one-time kind of shot.
And that will come under impact, because if you have something that's not self-sustaining, it's gonna be hard to say you're getting much impact out of that. Right?
Yeah.
So as you think about those things, and I just wrote it down because I think that helps us focus on what do we mean by impact. Impact's a pretty broad word. So I appreciate you bringing that up, so that you would rate them higher on impact if they were self-sustaining. Right? Okay.
I'm curious where the council is on how deep we go on making a more substantial impact in one area versus spreading it out. Because I thought that was good that you put that as a factor. I think that really colors how we put together our guidelines too. I mean, do we really want to make a broad impact on childcare, like the task force identified, or do we want to spread it out? And maybe not make a discernible impact in all 7 areas or 3 areas. We want to go big or go home, or I just don't know where everyone's at on that.
I'm always a person where if we spread it out too thin, then we don't end up making an impact at all. And so I feel like sometimes it's better to do one thing really well versus a bunch of things poorly. I know you guys have heard that statement from me a million times. But I think that statement applies to this process. I think we need to do a few things really well and not allocate a bunch of things so that it's just kind of done poorly.
Okay, so the others want to weigh on this
However,
question?
we're calling it a grant. However, a grant is presented, it needs to be vetted in a few ways, I think. The dollar ask and then what you're getting out of it, immediate and long term. Was it a well thought out? It's a business plan, really. Whatever the case is, there's a business case, or you can call it a business case, but how well thought out was the presentation? I mean, if you're asking for $500,000 and you're scratching something out on a note card, this is what I want. You know, hey, I put thought into it, here are my community partners that are involved, here's what we're doing, here's the end goal, here's what our feedback loop is, make sure we're getting held accountable. Presenting something like that gives a lot more faith that the dollar is being spent intelligently and going towards something that the community is.
I think that's what the application process is supposed to
Right.
accomplish. That's why that was one of my expectations, is because I think we need to have an application process that is where when people are applying for this money, it's well thought out, and it's proving that this is going to make a difference.
Well, if the money asked is like temporary gap financing because they've got money from this group and this group and this group, and this is our ongoing need, but we need a facility to move into, and it's that one-time cost that we need help with. Perfect use for this type of fund.
Yeah.
One time, kick in the pants, get you started, get you going, you have ways to sustain after that.
I agree.
So I think when you're getting to that level, those are operational criteria that we will get to once this part is done. Right?
Sidestepping it a little bit.
That's all right. So believe me, we can go to millions of resources on the internet to find exactly what you guys are talking about. Grant criteria will come, but you have to decide first your values and the factors you want to be included, because those criteria and those grant guidelines will come based on what you do here.
Well, I'm going to go back to what I said originally. Then we need to decide, are we going to split it 50-50, where 50% we allocate it back to our city staff, And 50% we go forward with a grant application process and a criteria.
Okay, so that's on the list, right? That's on that list, that's the next to last, the very last one. So that's already
But I think, yeah.
decided, okay? So I want to hear from, first I want to hear from Steve and Greg before we go back to that.
Well, I'm concerned how the big picture how it's going to be allocated. I think we need to know that before we get to the other things.
Right. And what we're going to decide tonight is that. So the next to last one, if you decide that that's what you want to do, you want, because this is not spelled out as specifically as you said, Sarah. So that's the point of discussion, right? All this says is, council makes the decision to spend it all, right? That's one option. Another option might be we do 50-50, like Sarah was talking about. Another option might be 25-75. I mean, and that's what you will decide tonight. But you've named one option, and we need to hear from everybody to go back to Jay's question about deep and narrow funding. So you go deep on economic development, and it's very narrow, focused on one area. Wide and shallow is the kind of thing you said you really don't prefer. Sprinkle a little bit out all 7 areas on the ARPA. And give 25% to city staff, 25% to Jeff for infrastructure, and 50% to sprinkle on everything ARPA talked about. That would be wide and shallow. So when you use the criteria of impact, that'd be pretty low impact in the funding world. Okay, that makes sense. All right, so really we've come across 2 now factors that we set forward here. So you make a decision whether you guys spend the whole, whatever we have left, 5.4 million, right? Something around there.
How much do they owe?
Well, we've got a little over 3 million, and another little over 3 million.
Okay.
But didn't we spend 880 on fire stuff?
Half of that, or
Look, yeah,
440.
440, and then you guys had indicated that maybe we would look at somewhere else where we could fund it, reserves or maybe general funds, so
okay.
that's up to you guys.
So you may have all 6 still, right? Does that make sense? We've got those 2 already, the decision that has to, we have to decide that tonight, right? Which way you want to go with that. And which way you want to go with this. So before we go back, let's go back to let Steve and Greg weigh in on this.
Okay, I got a couple questions. Okay. First of all, you call this a grant. This 6 million or 4 million is a grant from this ARPA budget, right? We're not, am I right or wrong?
Well, that's it may not be the correct term, right? It's a federal grant to,
So the federal grants the ARPA money we got.
and you're going to grant it then out to.
Okay, now I'm straight.
That makes sense.
Okay, the only thing I have concerns with that I hear around our citizens all knowing about this money. Trust me, I go talk to people and they say, okay, you spent this much money, you have how much money left in the bank? Trust me, they know from dollar to dollar what we have left. And we spent all this time getting all these groups together and sitting down and see what their needs are. Somehow we gotta make sure that we follow through with what we said we we're gonna do, to be fair and make sure that we try to meet the needs of people, what we have on that chart. Because they're watching us on this money. I mean, so, I just wanna make sure that we didn't do this for no reason at all. We gotta make sure we do this right. It might even come to that we take all the money and hand it out to businesses and citizens groups of the state. Because the city of Hutchinson, their funding, I know we are tied on our funding, but we get our money from the taxpayer. And I know this is tax money too, but we gotta try to do what we said we're gonna do as representatives of the city. and tried to be as fair as we can to them. We went to all this work.
So to be straightforward about what was told to the people who came to meetings, because I facilitated several, Lisa did, Denise did. We didn't promise them that everything they want on that list is going to happen, that it's coming back to you all.
Right.
And you are the decision makers. But what I wrote down, and let me see if this captures your heart, make sure we honor the people's input.
Okay.
So that could be, looking at it and saying, we want to do 3 of the 7.
Mm-hmm.
We think that's, in our judgment, as the leadership of the city, we think that's a good choice. And you've looked at everything, right? So I think you have taken time to honor their input. And that's really what folks were told at the meeting.
Right.
So, but I appreciate you wanting to make sure that you do that.
And Steve, I don't think we're going to be, if we go deep on these, we'll probably pick 2 or 3 and go deep. Because I'm with you on that. You can't be all things to all people. There's 7 things right here. I have my opinions on what we should go deep on. And I guess I don't have a problem with sprinkling it all out.
Yeah,
And I'd like to go deep too.
I'd like to go deep.
So we have,
And I think we have a framework here based off of the community and meeting. So that's what these summaries here that we were given. And I think we all agree that what we choose to go deep on is reflective of this input that we got from the community.
that's a great way to say it. So I'm, do you agree with the deep and narrow versus wide and shallow?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to circle that in red. Now I'm going to use orange because I use the red already. It's the only way to keep things straight. I type this up at the end for the day. That is going to be, so that's going to be a factor, right? So when you look at, Greg, when you look at the 7, and then you have these proposals that come in, are they sprinkling, are they short term? Then that's going to help you, or whoever makes that decision, decide on the final, who gets the money. And then you hand it out. Does that make sense? So that's why we're developing these factors. So that when grant proposals come to you, they will know one of our, that's where these factors translate into grant guidelines. You need to have something that's sustainable, self-sustaining, that is going to have a deep impact in the community on whatever area you guys choose. Does that make sense? How this is going to help us get to grant guidelines? Yes.
Finally come together.
Maybe.
What you're trying to
Maybe. If it's not, just blurt it out and say, geez, it's not making any sense. And I'll ask someone else in the room to explain it a different way, because that's okay too. All right, so let's talk about the percent of allocating funds. I want to try to tackle that one.
I have an alternative. Just throwing this out there, I'm not trying to throw a stick in his boat. 40-40, or the 20% holdback to later in the timeline for unknowns that could happen in the next year or 2. It could still be split 10%, 10% at the very end. Look at what's happened in the last 2 years on what our needs are as a community. What's going to be like in 2 years. That's not to say a vast majority of the funds can't be allocated. Just saying, I think it'd be smart to just say, let's have a little bit of reserve toward the 4th quarter. The very last part of it. Just throwing that out there as a potential.
40,
With the 20% to hold back for unknowns.
I feel like that spreads it though.
Well,
Because
so
it's
40-40, you got, what is that, 2.4 million, 2.4 million? I'm looking at the,
not
you just got the number, I'll believe you.
And then Sarah, yours was on the cities, yours was city 50. And 50, but you were specific about saying, handing it over to one of the partners
Yes.
who will then allocate the grant money.
Yes.
And they will go by the process you lay out.
Mhm.
Maybe they'll consult with you about how it should be written, or however you guys decide, right? 52 for allocations.
And if we sub that out to partners, there's going to be some overhead costs that partners are going to incur on handling this. And that's just how. I can't imagine it'd be a majority chunk, but there would be
Yeah.
some fees, administrative fees, handling it.
Who would handle
meetings.
it on our end?
Historically, the city's leaned on Hutch Foundation, things like that. There's others somewhat locally.
But if we did it internally, who would do that?
Probably the finance department.
We talked about that the other day. I think you'd have to staff up for it, depending on how broad you went with it.
That's what my, I think, would it be cheaper and more efficient to outsource it?
Rather than the 5 of us handle it once a quarter, or something like that.
I'm really curious if we even have a partner identified. We throw out Hutch Community Foundation, they're not in the room, have conversations been had with them about whether they want to take on this gig, because it's an extraordinary amount of money, and they would have to staff up too. So either we're paying somebody to administer it, they certainly have more expertise in that field than we do internally. But we're not going to get off cheap by just giving it to them when it's going to take a lot of, maybe half the person.
The gist I got was there's a willingness, they're not chomping at the bit.
Yeah.
They're willing to partner, it's not something that they are just, give us the money. That's the gist I got out of it.
Can we back up just a second? Does the council feel that a 50-50 split is in order?
I would like to reconsider that.
I would too.
Well, that's just one of the options.
Okay.
You're not voting on it, or,
Yeah,
that's an option.
I guess I would ask, I mean, how far behind are we as a city because of COVID? I mean, there was a chance here to do something that we wouldn't normally get to do.
The biggest impact COVID is going to have for us and has had is related to staffing and future costs related to staffing. As far as projects, it's driven costs up. I don't think we can say that we've deferred any major projects because of it or permanently stalled any projects. But here's probably the better answer, more workable for you. We have a backlog of capital projects and no mechanism to fund those. And the ones that qualify, even those alone, that typically come out of sewer and water, even if you just wanted to be specific to that, I mean, federal guidance, we could probably spend $18 million more.
And I think you know how I feel about trying to help the budget. But the whole point of this, I think, from the feds was, maybe I shouldn't say that. I just think we have a chance here, and we really need to consider if we just throw it at the budget. And believe me, I'm not looking forward to the budget process because I know it's going to be hard. This will make it easier. And I've even made mention of that, but I just want to be sure that we do the right thing. I think we ought to just have, I don't have an answer. I don't know that I have a number.
Well, maybe this will help. I'm curious what our general fund reserves are, because I have a feeling they're higher than they've been in a long time.
Yeah, we ended 2021 with 9 million in our general fund. Which is
And-
higher than we budgeted.
Our ordinance is for 2 months. We prefer to have 2 months of operating expenses for our ending balance, which might be different now, but it was about 5.2 million.
5.2, 5.4 or something.
And so that's where I feel like we should be looking at a 75-25 split or something and move off that 50-50, because this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to make an impact outside of just the city specific. The city as an organization, not the city as a community.
You say 75 for the city?
75.
I'm asking, I'm just looking for verification.
Okay, we have a third. Jeff, can I go back to your staffing? I didn't catch what about staffing. I put up here a list for Steve COVID impact.
Yeah, what we're seeing it do to prevailing wage.
All right, and we don't have to, if you want to move to, we have a whole list of things we can move to.
I think we did the settle list.
You want to settle this before you move forward?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see if we can do that. Steve,
Steve,
I'm sorry, you go by Steve or Steve?
I'm going to tell Steve it's fine. Or Steve, I like Steve.
Okay.
Can I jump in for 10 seconds? How do we allow the governing body to stay open to the flexibility that they currently have tonight before they set up a process, knowing that we're going to be jumping into budget and there's going to be some budget messages conveyed that may be shocking, may be unexpected, but I wouldn't want our group to regret some of the flexibility that they could potentially have if they hadn't set percentages tonight.
Well, yeah, I think that's a great point. It kind of goes back to your conversation earlier about timeline. So the outside timeline for these funds to be encumbered, like planned, right? This is not like spent, is December 2024. So there's not a rush at this point, right? You have a year and a half plus. So, even though the county's jumping on getting theirs spent, there's nothing that requires you to do that, am I correct? So there's some flexibility built in to extending the timeline. That would allow you a lot of flexibility, and you can allocate, there's all kinds of ways you can do that. But
I just think if we did have a clear set goal and consensus about that, we would then could move on to our deep and narrow. If it's, I guess just to put it, if there's 40% that we're allocating to outside, maybe we only take 2 to make more of an impact. If it's 75%, maybe we take 3. I really think depending on how much money we know is going into this bucket, it's going to kind of help us decide
I think
what our sub-buckets are going to be.
what Mr. Cantrell is saying is that if we say, let's say we choose 50-50 and we get in the budget season, then we're going to have some, it sounds to me like we're going to have some hard decisions to make, and we're going to think, wow, I wish we would have more than 50% of this, because we could use ARPA funds to offset these budget costs that are just scary.
That's why I chose 50-50, because I honestly think if we decide to keep more than 50, then the public's going to be really upset. I do believe the 50-50 split is fair, because I know we're going to have budget problems, and I know that we've made not like a promise to the community that we've heard what they said. That's why I thought 50-50. And if we don't end up spending our 50, maybe we put it towards one of the buckets here, like into brush up Hutch, or our roofing program for down deposits on the roof. But if we keep at least 50%, and let's say we only, which I know we won't, this is hypothetical, we only spend 30% of the 50 we've allocated towards the city. But we can still put another 20% towards programs that are in our house, like our housing funds, like the sidewalks. But I think to keep it, I think 50-50 is fair. I think if we decided to do 75% just for city infrastructure and city needs, I don't think that it would be equitable to the community.
Well, if we were to do 50/50,
Yeah.
or if we were to look at 60/40 or 75/25, being heavy towards the community, then I would want, if we went heavier towards the community needs, I would want to have one of the deep and impactful, whatever, to go towards something economic development, which then feeds back into
Yeah.
money into our communities, so later on down the road, maybe we're not having such harsh budget situations.
Yeah.
That's more long-term, but I think there's gotta be some reciprocation, if that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
I just want to remind everyone that it's going to be a difficult budget session. Also, we just heard that our reserves are literally 4 million over what our own ordinance says they need to be. $4 million. We've never been in this position.
I'm in a business where it's twice as much to do business as it was a year and a half ago. I wouldn't be too terribly surprised that 4 million gets swallowed up pretty quick. I mean, just on, because who knows what the operation, I mean, fuel costs. Trying to hire people that were willing to, you know, in my industry, we're trying to hire people 19, 20 bucks an hour, you can't get them to show up for the first day of work.
Yeah.
And 14 bucks an hour a year ago, you get anyone one job. I mean, it's the nature of the beast right now. I'm worried we're gonna have some surprises. I mean, I get the price stuff every day, it's like, well, that's 30% more than it was a month ago. Holy cow,
Yeah.
can't predict.
I just think we have a unique opportunity. We heard directly from the public how they want these funds to be spent. Wouldn't it be great if we were responsive to that input at a higher level than 50/50? So I would like to see something higher than 50. I'm confident that if we keep it at 50/50, there are things within the city that can still have impacts in those buckets, like you said, Sarah. We still have a housing commission, and maybe we allow them to weigh in on our own housing programs and how money can be spent in, low-interest loans to repair or grants for renovation. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done within the city budget, but what I hear when I hear from city staff, we want 50 for infrastructure, I don't see that 50 going to anything but, roads and bridges. I don't really sense that there's like a drive to spend it on, say, housing or increase the economic development outlay.
We've got a black hole for money to go in, and it'll be like as though it was never there.
And just to be clear, I was more towards giving more money to one of these and less money to the city. Maybe I should rethink that based on your employment off there and, or just people, I know we need to address compression soon, that's going to cost money.
It's like the philosophical question, really. On the one hand, what do you do now helps you in the future and gives you capacity on your budget to not go to property owners for property tax increase. At some point, we know at some point that's going to have to happen. That's just a law of business and what we do, the law of the dollar. How soon we have to do that? Well, we knock some of these other things out first, maybe not as soon as we thought. It's all relative.
So I go back to the 40-40-20, not allocating 20, knowing you can swing one way or the other after budget season.
Well, I think that this is just an idea, but I think if we set up a process, say we do 40-60, we're still going to have flexibility within that to score applications, and maybe you don't end up allocating all 60. I mean, it doesn't need to be as draconian as we're saying, like, oh, we can't touch a dollar of that 60%. Or maybe it does, I don't know. We do want something clear for the community.
And I think that would be another criteria is transparency for that attorney.
Is it more of this is a goal percentage we're trying to reach, rather than, sorry, we've hit the 50% and we've only had 30% allocated over here, And so 20% isn't gonna get spent, that doesn't make any sense.
I guess I would feel more comfortable about allocating more to the city's percentage if I felt like some of the expenditures would be within the priorities identified by the community.
Okay, so, like maybe we go back to John's 40-40-20, but except for 20 hold back, the 20 would go towards the housing commission and those grants and
Then we'd be giving 60% to the city, which
stuff. I know, it's trying
At
to.
the end of the day, it's- at the end of the day, it benefits to the community as a whole, it's just honoring the feedback.
Yeah.
So maybe you, Stephen, where are your thoughts right now? On the notion of percentage of allocation, which way?
Well, I think I'd be okay with 40-60. I don't know, it's a little, 60 being the citizens, correct, 40 being the city.
Correct.
Well, I have not a problem with, I got questions, for we got this bridge project coming up, is that gonna be bonded? Is that coming out of general fund? I know we're not, or we gonna try, that there is heavy on my mind, I know that expense is coming up.
Wood seat,
Yes,
we haven't framed the financing on that yet. We don't even know which option yet.
right, I understand it. Would that generally be funded by bonds, even whatever route we go, would that be bonds, that coming out of general?
Depending on what kind of grants we may be able to find, we'll knock some of it out that way, but yeah, it would be issuance of debt, for sure.
That's a big thing coming up. Now, the atrium, we know what we're gonna put them on the X Factor, and taking them down little by little. But, we're gonna have some costs there coming up next year. So this is some big decisions we got coming up. This next budget year is gonna be really, really, really hard. And I think about that all the time, so, I don't know, on that aspect, when I think about that, maybe we need to fund the city a little bit harder, just a backup plan. If I was knowing that we're gonna get bonds for the bridges.
What about 50, but 10% of the city's 50 goes towards the housing commission?
I think like that. Then are we saying then the other 50% is going to go to housing? Because we have a lot of other organizations that help. with
No, I think
Yeah.
we would then go towards that 50 being our decided rubric to weigh. When we decided where are we going deep, that's our next discussion. I just think we need to, so I'm proposing 40% infrastructure, 10% to the housing under the city's bucket, and 50% towards our weighted rubric. And scratch my partner allocation, I don't know, we still have to figure that out.
And there will be a percentage off of all these percentage for administration.
Yeah.
Cost of.
Yeah, that'll be there with our.
The housing commission, yeah, 10% to the housing commission.
So 10 of the 50.
Yeah, and then 50 all the way out to the community. That's my proposal.
So the only other concern that you raised, which John's 20% for holdback, is not, how do you feel about that, John?
I would say that, kind of in the same spirit, let's say you went with your 50-50 with 10% towards housing. Let's say, let's make sure we're not allocating the last 20% of the funds until later in the process. Let's not just give it, let's not just if bunch of opportunities come up in the first 6 months, let's not just spend the whole thing in 6 months. Let's have a little bit that we're sitting on. Let's wait toward the end of the opportunity.
Yeah, I think we could do that on the city side. I just think that when we allocate the 50% of the community, in order to make the impact that we need, I feel like we just need to be like
Here you go.
here you go, let's do this.
Yeah, I mean, it is in response to the emergency, and so like, we probably should be getting the money
Yeah.
out. We just want to do it thoughtfully. I don't want to, hold on to emergency funding for a rainy day,
Yeah.
you know, because it's, in theory, the rainy day is here, that's the emergency, you know, so.
Greg, how do you feel about the 50/50 with 10% of the housing?
I mean, I think that's a compromise. What will the housing commission do? How will that stimulate new and improved housing in our town?
Well, there have been multiple proposals over the years that have gone totally unfunded. Proposals for zero interest loans or grants to renovate homes in certain target neighborhoods. Proposals for sidewalk repair, expanding, brush up Hutch. I mean, they're not short of ideas. I wish we had Brian here. Lisa, aren't you on the housing commission?
I am the housing commissioner.
Okay, let's hear.
But do you want me to speak to it or not? Because you're at the council, so we met today.
I think they could do a lot of good, I've been to a couple of meetings.
I would trust that. I mean, you said enough, and your idea says enough.
Yes, we would spend it in a heartbeat if, I think going back into already established programs that have shown progress and shown impact within our community, whether it be brush up Hutch, whether it be low interest or net zero loans, whether it be the neighborhood process that we have in place through Hutch Track. I think that would be another place that we can see real impact for our community. So the Housing Commission did meet today, and would love to come before you whenever that process, whenever you get your process set in place to come and to talk to you about our proposal.
Have you seen the pamphlet of all the programs? There's like 8 of them, right? Have you read over that?
I have not.
Yeah, so
I may
there's,
have.
and each one of them would make an impact and fit into what the community has said. They have 8 really good things. And I'm confident that if those were fully funded, there would be an impact.
So there, another decision point here is of the 10%, do you want to keep control? Do you want the housing commission to come tell you what they can do and you decide yes on brush up Hutch, no on neighborhood, or yes on neighborhood? Just give it to them to, you feel comfortable they will expend the dollars in a way that will, I mean, even if, I suppose you could say in a way that the ARPA, that the community spoke to about housing.
When we fund those buckets for like programs like budget, normally we do that in the budget session, correct?
Typically, yeah.
And so, once we had to do the 10%, we would actually talk about this in the budget session, and it would have to, wouldn't it have to be allocated to certain buckets? We'd have to put that fund.
It'd be part of the budgeting process.
Yeah.
I'd be comfortable with that.
I'd be comfortable with that.
I also feel like, you know, the housing commission is supposed to be pretty representative of the community, with those in the community with interest in housing, you know, landlords, bankers, social services, business owners, volunteers.
So, are we ready to call for consensus here? The proposal of, and we haven't decided on the partner piece, so just say 50 to someone, community focus, not business.
Well, I guess there are grant opportunities for the city to apply for,
That's good. All
or
right,
for the community to apply for.
Grant us, okay? 10%, 50 to the city, and this is of 6 million, according to Angela, right? Okay, so 3 million to the city, 10% of that 3 million is We go to the housing commission. So that is,
The match is 10% of the 50%, or is it 10% of the whole?
No, 10%.
percent of the 3 million.
Wait,
10%.
it's 10% of the 50%.
We've
So
agreed
it's
to
5% of the total.
Yes.
We've agreed to 50/50 with
Yes.
strings attached to the city's portion.
Okay, so the city can spend 45% of the total ARPA funds on their own.
Well, through the budget process, 10% of that 50% or 5% would be allocated to programming through the housing commission.
Yes.
$300,000.
Yes, which is huge for the housing.
Just, I want to make sure it's 300, not 600.
Yeah, no,
Make
it's
sure I remember it.
300, yes.
So you go back here, and that sounds like deep and narrow too. So
Yeah.
that's criteria.
Yeah, I think it's gonna make a huge, huge difference, and it ties right back to one of the top 3 priorities. So I feel like it's, do we have consensus? I'm gonna say aye.
It sounds well placed.
Okay.
Steve?
I'll go with that. It sounds good. Yeah, 50/50 with 10%.
Sarah? John?
Yes.
I don't know, are you taking minutes, official minutes, Jeff, or is this it?
No, but we're being recorded.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's good. I hate to be responsible for all this. Okay, so this is a decision. All right, how about at least a 5-minute stand-up break? Anybody need
I love
to
it, yeah.
stretch?
Yes, let's do it.
Let's do that. I'm back, please, in 5 to 7 minutes. Which means everybody's active. Because I like it.
The paper wrapper situation.
I didn't say anything.
Feedback's important.
Thanks for your input today. Good.
I don't like that thing, because I keep seeing how old I am. Is that what it is? I keep seeing the age on it. Your age? Yeah. Is it flashing up there? It is. It's like 53, 53. Yeah. No, I'm way older than that. No, way older? Yeah.
I agree. It was very interesting when we started to put all the projects and the estimates in there, how fast that can be spent.
Comfortable with them? Is that from a legal standpoint?
There's nothing subject to go on here, so it's okay.
Okay. You have to sort it out.
Because ultimately, whatever you have a consensus on, you'll have to bring it to the council meeting and actually do it. So that's what I'm worried about. Although I'm always worried about that I show up where there's a majority of the council.
Definitely piques your interest, huh?
Well, I'm majority risk management, so.
Sounds like a good thing to be watching. So are we coming through loud and clear?
We don't have any pauses, so we're going to pass the break now. Do it outside.
We're still being taken.
Yes.
Filmed and taken.
I just show them, as long as it's the majority of the council, make sure we're not doing things we show off.
That's true. It's like working at a elementary elementary school, there's a hospital, you know, a hospital, just a crowd of people.
Every time you take the cell, it's sick.
So I started looking at examples of restricting it. Because like if we pass the money on to United Way or something, then we'll have to have some restricting. And it's still not what should be in it. And then it says have your lawyer insert your lawyer in. So, hold on, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Isn't that
She's a,
It's, I don't know what you
I know what's wrong with you.
like. One of those things that we're using is to, help people get a facility. Well, we don't have enough to do that. So that program already established that we have to talk to. Yeah, it's probably using it. Yeah, it's.
It doesn't get very animated.
There's a lot of stuff going around right now too. I think no matter what, just like with everything else, we're gonna have people unhappy with whether it's decision.
Can't make everybody happy.
No.
I'd be surprised how many people that have that. Well, you spent this much money, you should have 3 million, and they tell me exactly. Yeah.
They got an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Yeah, just bought 3 fire trucks.
Yeah.
Fire suits.
Now, did it have a full tank of fuel in it? You put that in there too. I used to, one of my customers used to eat one fire truck down in Florida. They were not cheap. Eating one fire truck, they were out in Florida, they used to get customer money. I used to design the drive system to swing on the ladder. I mean, they had stuff in the city of Anaheim. You know what I mean? And it's just,
Here's what we propose. And then
it's Vegas.
Yes, no, let's do it this way. And then just budget.
Well, we don't have to wait until the.
So I put up our 2 decisions here. I want to clarify that 10% of the 50% goes to housing commission, correct?
Yeah.
And 50%, 40% of the 50 goes to city, any prescribed ways that she needs to
Well, I mean,
spend.
no, 50% goes to the grant, 50% goes to the city, and then 10% of that 50%.
But the 40% that's left here for the
It'd
city,
be 45%.
45%, are you
We really want to get into
anything, any way that that 45%?
Jay wants $1 million for sidewalks.
I do want a lot of.
I know, you do, and somehow I was.
That'll get you 1 mile.
Yeah.
So I was looking for a yes or no.
Things attached to that.
Any strings attached to it? I just want to clarify, because
That would be nice to have the freedom during the budget discussions, for everybody to know, oh, this is one way we can avoid property tax, or we hit our max cap on debt service, so that we can do more projects with this lump sum on a particular project.
And that doesn't mean we can't spend more than 10% on housing commission. I think that's a minimum.
entity who will make that decision on our behalf.
Well, I think we're going to make a decision as to which buckets, and then the best ideas within those buckets. So, in a sense, I think we still have control over where the impact is. Is that how you?
Well, you did that with the housing commissioner, right? So you gave it to them, it was one of these, and so they're going to decide the specifics of it. But so you could do the same with the 50%.
I would like to talk about our rubric. So,
Wait, let me do it, okay?
I'm trying.
I know. I'm pleading for one more minute of patience.
What am I okay?
Are you okay with delaying the decision on the?
Yes, I
Okay, all right. Good answer.
All right. As far as rivers go, are they, hold on, let me get this back out. Healthcare, or sorry, childcare, weighted high. So I would like us first to discuss what are, I believe we should have 3 buckets.
Okay, before we get there, we're not.
No, I want to get there though.
Okay.
So I'm gonna finish. 3 buckets that are weighted a certain way is gonna be on the rubric. Whether it's self-sustainable after the injection of cash would be on the rubric. And like you said, I guess it would be the legacy too as well. I don't know. But I think our route needs to be weighted based off of, will this one-time cash injection be self-sustainable? It can't be a project, like they submit a project and then it looks like they can't survive on their own after the initial cash injection. That needs to be, that needs to be a criteria, I believe, of it.
So I hear you saying 2 different things. So you're talking content areas, childcare, economic development for the housing.
Yeah, so you have 3 buckets.
Right.
So
So you're saying those are, you want to select option 1, 2, 3.
it's like X and Y on the graph. I have the 3 buckets here, and I have, this is sustainable, one cash thing that's gonna make a big impact, and it's childcare. Bingo, that's a ballpark, that's a great application. Because we can't just look, when you're doing the rubric, I believe it needs to be, where does it end on this? Let's say it has something to do with economic development, right? And it's extremely self-sustainable, and it's gonna have a huge impact. Versus it's gonna be rated higher than something that might be healthcare related that isn't sustainable and doesn't have a very big impact. We need to have a rubric that will shoot things higher or lower based off sustainability and the community input.
And transparency is another criteria that you listed earlier this evening.
I have a question for the group. So, we're talking about having deep and narrow impacts. Are we going to pick 2 or 3 of these subjects? Or are we just saying, bring one of the 7, if it's in the top 3, we're going to weight it higher? I think we need to concentrate, hey, childcare this, or
I say we
childcare
pick
this
3,
and this.
I say we pick 3 buckets.
I say we pick some
2 buckets?
No, I think we need to pick where we need to make the deep impact.
Okay.
I think we need to pick.
So we just pick out the top 3.
That wouldn't be my vote.
So the list that you're talking about is the local one.
This one, yeah, black and white.
My top 2 would be developing more affordable housing and supporting local and small businesses. That would be my top two. I know that doesn't align with the childcare. My concern with the childcare thing is it's so big of a problem. I don't know that we can impact it properly. I don't know.
Do you want me to comment on
I
that?
actually would like to hear about what are your strategic, like if we did create a higher weight on that, are there applications that you guys have discussed that would actually make an impact that is self-sustainable?
Absolutely. I'm not prepared to make a formal statement tonight, but we can come back with you, to you, and be able to show you statistics. You know, I can show you statistics that childcare affects economic development, it affects workplace development, it affects healthcare, it affects mental health. So if we factor all those in and you think about sustainability of the community, if you are setting people up for success from the beginning, you know, the odds are our community is going to be better off in the long run. We think about 10 to 20 years down the road.
I guess what I'm saying is I understand that, but how does a dollar equate to
That is my concern, exactly my
How does
concern.
dollar-
I understand the importance of childcare and how it does affect our economy and our workers. I mean, there is
Two
no
of the
question.
people that were with me tonight have to leave because they're having childcare needs, so they have to go take care of it.
But I guess, how do we effectively throw dollars at childcare to make it a difference
Where do you want to
in
send
20
it?
years?
We're strategic in how we do that, and we are, I think you know that we have a market study that is being done through K-State that is helping us do that. And through that market study, I believe it's also going to help us determine where is the best way to spend dollars if we want to really impact childcare for longer term. We are looking at other ways, whether it's grants and other ways that we know that can help supplement these dollars as we look at sustainability long term. But data shows that the investment in childcare is long term.
Yeah, so it could be even an application where, let's say there's a company that wants to provide a childcare facility where they work, like a place, like it's a business, they want to provide it for their employees. So would that strike under economic development and childcare? You know?
Yeah.
I think that's why we need this. So like that would get weighted even higher because it's striking off two of the buckets. But on what you're saying, I would like the buckets to be supporting local small businesses, childcare, and housing. Because I think supporting local small businesses, like the economic development piece, needs to be one of the buckets. So it might not even be, I think it needs to be economic development, childcare, and housing. Those are the three.
I would just mention that it's worth noting that the reason nothing has been done in the childcare space is precisely because the problem is so enormous. Nobody knows how to untie the Gordian knot. But I would challenge us to not bury our heads in the sand just because it is so tough. I would challenge us to take it on. And if we can do so strategically and we have the proper planning in place, which, is already in process, I would like to see us go really big on the childcare and understand that my daughter, I have one child, she's going into kindergarten. I will never use those services again. None of us on council probably will. But it's incumbent upon us to create a community where anybody going forward will have those tools to succeed and hopefully we don't continue to lose people from this community who can't find adequate childcare. I know my best friend, moved a couple months ago, couldn't find childcare. She's in Lawrence now. And that's not an isolated example. So I would like to see us go really, really big on childcare, affordable housing, and economic development.
I agree, I'm gonna agree with Dave. I think it needs to be, I think that just, it needs to be that. I think because the community said childcare, it was one of the most top, I was on the ARPA task force, and I can tell you that childcare is one of the biggest concerns and one of the biggest hurdles for workforce and economic development.
I'm not
And
saying
I
we
understand,
ignore
yeah,
it.
so I think,
I just say we need to be very careful
I agree.
how we spend money towards childcare.
Yeah.
Because I don't think throwing money at it is gonna fix it, although that's what we have, because we have money to try to fix it.
I think we're trying to identify systems change within the childcare space so that it's not being approached as like a vacuum of it's just gonna suck down money. What Sarah mentioned, I thought was a really great idea. If you've got businesses who want to retrofit some of their property for a childcare space, it's an onerous process licensing wise. I mean, there's a lot, it's a heavily regulated space. So, I mean, things like that. And then you maybe get corporations to partner with, providing some of the cost of childcare. I mean, there's a lot of unique ways we can think about it that haven't been tried before because we have money to experiment.
and I'm counsel that as well. People are also having a hard time getting people to work, so they're raising wages and raising incentives right now. So if a company wants to attract a really good workforce, adding childcare and having the ability to apply for a grant to get the licensing fees, get the retrofit, getting, like having a mechanism of just the one time, just to get it off the ground as an employee benefit. That's why I really think if it's childcare, self-sustainable, money that's just launching a program, I mean, that's something that's what the rubric is for. So if they are coming in and saying, I need this money, and it's gonna help childcare, it's gonna help economic development, and it's gonna help the workforce, and it's only a one time to get the program launched, that's what we're looking for this money to spend.
Well, and having a community partner that's more involved in the childcare industry, knowing that this is available, I can use that because I have an idea how to solve problems because I'm in the industry. You are.
It can also,
And
yeah,
that's, and to your point, I don't wanna put my head in the sand, and I feel like I've done that with my comments. It's just so big.
I get it, yeah.
another thing is equipment. You could have a small home daycare, and in order to make their house or small home daycare more robust, or being able to maybe have more children, having the ability to apply for grants so that they could put a playground in their backyard or an addition on the back of the house these are things that I think should be weighed heavily.
Yeah,
So they're gonna provide
that.
better services, so let's say it's just a home daycare person that wants to update their equipment, make it safer and do some renovations on their home health daycare, and it's gonna create 3 more spots. So so this person might be a smaller grant applicant, so they're like, I want $60,000, and I'm gonna create 3 new spots in the playground in the backyard.
And let's
That's
remember
gonna be
that
really
small
heavy.
businesses, right?
Yeah.
Supporting small businesses,
Yeah.
many of them
I
are out
understand
of
that.
business.
Did you have a comment, Lisa?
Well, I feel like it's just not my place to talk tonight, but just know that we think about how awesome you guys are to even consider what the community has said, right? You are willing to listen, and childcare was the #1 issue that came about from places even like, we were talking to businesses, they weren't talking about economic development, they were talking about childcare. We were talking to the people who are invested in housing, and their #1 issues were childcare. So knowing that if this is such an issue for our community, and if we really want to use these funds to make a deeper impact long-term, we want to look back. I've lived in Hutchinson all my life, I love Hutchinson, right? I want to be proud to say, in 10 years or 20 years, because we did that, we changed the course of our community. We said kids were most important, and we figured out a way to change the model and change the system. And we didn't shirk from it, we weren't afraid of it. We hit it head on, we got good data, and we learned what we could do to change it. And perhaps we could teach other communities, because we know other communities are struggling also. Perhaps once we get it right, we can teach other communities. So I just think it's important for us to think long-term. Growing up here, people always said it's a great place to raise kids. I want that to still be the narrative, and I'm not sure it is anymore.
With that in mind, I would propose that we spend of the 50% allocated to the community, 30% on childcare, 10% on the other two buckets. And I'm just throwing that out for conversation, discussion.
Okay, I'm gonna move this back to the buckets.
No. Let's go back to the buckets. Let's talk about, I really think we need to talk about the rubric that's gonna get us there.
This is gonna get us there, trust me. Gonna have about 5 minutes, and then if not where you think you need to be, you can redirect this. So you've already opened the conversation about the content area, and there is some disagreement about what those three should be, right? So before we start allocating these three areas, and assuming that's what everybody wants, I'd like to go back to that conversation. What I have been doing is writing up your criteria that you've been talking about. Possibility, hit 2 or more priorities. We used to talk about childcare, it's economic development, and sustainability is one thing, you guys. Transparency, deep and narrow. So we've already got 4 different criteria here by which to evaluate when organizations, or however the process is set up, start bringing in proposals, okay? So what about, are you ready to make a decision tonight about the buckets?
I would like to say that I believe we keep the 50% bucket, but I believe that we weigh heavily on childcare. I believe that childcare is a 5 on the weight, and the eco-devo and housing could be a 2 or a 3 when you're deciding on this rubric. You know what I mean? Like, I think if we make a rubric in a way where if someone comes with an idea for childcare, it's going to have priority over the others.
Okay. That could be, but these are going to tell you more probably about the proposal, right? If you want to weight it that heavily,
Yeah.
then why not? Another way to do that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is give them a bigger pot to apply for. So there are a lot of different ways you can weight it.
If there's a really, really good economic development though, I would hate to split that bucket apart like that, because what if there is something that's just really, really good in all the other areas? It's still a second tier bucket, and it's going to be a project that is just going to make a huge difference in the community.
So you'd be okay with giving everything to childcare? If you had 5 proposals in on childcare, and they each get a heavier weight, then they're going to get the funding.
Yeah.
So that's what
I'm saying. Yeah. We don't know how it's going. I believe that, but I'm saying I would be okay with that if they scored very heavily and it was very high. I'd be fine with that.
Okay. How about the other? Steve, John, Ray, what are your thoughts on where we are right now? Are you ready to talk about priority areas, also known as buckets?
First of all, on the childcare, who makes the rules on, she called Q, who makes the rules on who's going to get the money?
Well, that hasn't been decided yet. That's still out there, Steve. Because that could be an outside agency, like the Union Foundation or some outside, or it could stay internally here too. So
I think we need to make the parameters, and then the outside agency just services. I thought that's what we're here for.
Right, but his question was, have we decided that?
On a grant funding committee, a lot of times, so let's say we went 30, 10, and 10. Right? There's childcare, economic development, housing. you get toward the end of the funding, you don't have a whole lot left. An opportunity comes along, and it could be economic development, it's got some childcare to it. The deciding factor, they could say, we're gonna put this in the economic development bucket. We have more funds there, and this one does have an economic development ring to it. And they could ride right on top of either one of those. We're gonna put it in the bucket that has funds still in it. So we can leave some for the childcare in case something comes in that's solitarily childcare. So there's some strategy in the grant funding mechanism of it also.
Well, you think about this, all three of those, a family comes here to live in Hutchinson, they gotta worry about childcare, they gotta worry about economic development, hopefully they're gonna get the job, and they gotta worry about housing. So all three of those tie together if we're gonna make this city move. So, I don't know about, so how do you know we're gonna spend $30,000 on childcare? Can we give them, we have the ability to move funds around, but once we give them the money, set percentages, then we can't move anything around. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's what Dave's trying to say, is let's allow 30% of the total dollars a year, 10 and 10, or whatever we decide.
I want the community to have a sense as to where this money is going. I'm with you. I mean, we give it all to childcare, but I think if we leave it kind of loosey-goosey where, we've got $3.5 million or $3.2 million, that could all go to childcare, or some of it could go to this or this. I would like greater transparency and clarity to the public. And that's why I proposed the buckets, so people know, well, this amount is going to childcare. I'm fine either way, again, not the hill I'm gonna die on, because I can see benefits of flexibility, but I do think from a transparency standpoint, the community might appreciate knowing where it's going.
I still say there's some flexibility to it, because there's gonna be opportunities, this could be in any one of those. There's gonna be cross-contamination
Oh, yeah,
between.
because you figure out childcare, your labor force is larger, because women aren't staying at home.
The grant funding group, whoever it might be, it'd be nice to know that they've been down this road before, and that they can say, we know how to handle this in such a way where we get down toward the end, we're not gonna corner ourselves,
Right.
where we can't fund something.
I would like
that fits
it-
the bucket.
I'm gonna go back to, I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again. Childcare, not the housing, but childcare being way heavy. So if someone turns in an application for economic development, that also includes a childcare component to it, they're going to automatically get bumped up as a top priority and possible person that's gonna get the grant.
So as in a grant funding process, when you're looking at an opportunity that comes up like that,
Yeah.
you're gonna say, we know, based on the 30-10-10, that childcare is a heavy hitter. But here's a double whammy, we get childcare and economic development.
Yeah.
We really like this opportunity, everything else fits, we need to put this toward the top of the list.
Yeah,
Those type of things, those rise to the top.
okay, yeah, so that's just what I want to accomplish.
And I would
I want
suggest,
people to know that when they're applying for this money, that they have a childcare component in there, or they have an economic development and housing component, that they're thinking of these.
and it's gonna be important, because people writing grants know how to do this and may not follow through, and you're gonna, or whoever's gonna have to decide, is that really legitimate? Are they showing you the numbers that both of these are gonna be helpful? So that's part of the piece that the decision makers who are deciding about the grants. But if you put here, get two or more priorities, then these are gonna be your weighted factors, criteria, right? So you
Yeah.
put your weight here, not here.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Now, you also weight it by the 30-10-10.
Yes.
So that's telling people who are applying, this has the biggest bucket of money.
Okay.
So you're weighting it that way too, but I would suggest you put your weight up here. So sustainability and transparency, this one may get 5, this may get 5, and this will get 3, 5. I don't know how you weight it, right?
How does transparency go? I think transparency to the process, but I don't think it's part of the rubric, right?
Well, she's just saying, we need to be transparent in how much money we're gonna a lot. That's transparency, is like, okay, we've allotted this amount, or this percentage, not just, we're gonna concentrate on these three.
Yeah, I think you're right, sir. I think that might be misplaced up there.
Yeah, I was just saying the position.
I agree.
that it was-
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it really doesn't belong up there in the criteria.
Yeah.
You guys are gonna be transparent.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, we're gonna be transparent, it's more a part of the process and not the rubric, that's all I was trying to say.
No, I agree with you.
This might be a stupid question, but I'm gonna ask you this, Sarah. Is this childcare, is it for affordable childcare? Or is it to get business so we get more childcare? Because I got 15 grandkids, and I know that guess where they go to when they get my babysitter?
You're pretty affordable, huh?
Yeah.
I have a 4-year-old. if you're-
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. The reason they come to grandpa's house is because they can't afford the childcare we got now. So my question to you, is it for affordable childcare, or is it for starting more child? And I understand probably the reason why it's expensive, because childcare, they're not out there anymore. They're all going to one person or whatever the case may be.
Well, like where my daughter lives, I've actually had the same childcare provider, right? Since when I first started going there, I was actually on government assistance, right? I never moved her, my kid still goes to the same childcare, and it is subsidized through the Kansas. But I don't get any subsidies anymore, I pay full price, because I've incomed out of that, right? There's a lot of, like, if you go down, there's a place off of Second Street, where's the place that has the list that you can go to all the childcare providers? Yes, okay. That's where I found my childcare provider a long time ago. I've been with her since 2012, okay, so it's been like 10 years. I believe that a lot of these home health could maybe apply for some of the smaller grants that would help if they're applying for upgrading equipment or better backyard, educational things for their children. These could be smaller grants that they apply for. That's gonna help low-income families who use those daycares that are subsidized. Do you get what I'm saying there?
Yes.
Like, I believe that it just needs to be childcare, because there's, whether it's facilities or upgrades, or, I don't want it to just be limited to low income, but I think there's opportunity for them to apply some of these home childcares. But then I also would encourage the Chamber of Commerce and other places to talk to these corporations and businesses about starting employee incentives where they offer a child care incentive for their employees.
So, Steve, yes.
So that might not
Could be
be,
both.
yes,
Right, it could be both.
it probably will be both.
But what you need to, that all hinges on whether you decide to farm it out or you make those decisions.
Right.
So whoever is making those grant decisions will probably get all of those votes. Because what you're setting up here are the criteria that those organizations or someone here will use to make that decision. So if they want to get playground equipment, that's not as deep and narrow as setting up a system where you're going to link a business
Right.
to a child care center. And then they partner with subsidies from that business for 50% of their employees, right?
Right.
That's more of this than playground equipment. So those, the decisions are going to be made based on your criteria that you develop in this process. Does that make sense?
Yes. I can see where you have a grant process, and you have more people going, making childcare places. And if that happens, then it will come down, because now you got more places to take your child. Okay.
So it could be both. All right, we have 30 minutes. So let me do a process check here. 3 buckets. Are you guys okay with these 3? John, Greg, I'm looking at John saying,
Yes.
you can, because you were looking at small business too. So we're even, if these 3 are the ones that you want to move forward on.
I'm wanting small business to be in the economic development as part of it. So that'd be large and small economic development.
So what's listed here for strategies is workforce development, and you'd like to add in there supporting local and small business.
I would like the economic development to be more towards, I believe local and small business falls in that economic development bucket.
Both you and Greg have voiced that. How about the other three? What do you think about economic development? Go with what is 2N5 on the executive summary there I'm looking at.
I'm fine with those three things.
Yeah,
Economic development is supporting local and small business in my mind.
in my mind too.
But do you want to single that out? Say 2 and 5.
I think that
Because
that's
it's hang on one second. Workforce development and supporting local, they're two different sets of strategies.
Okay,
I'm not wanting workforce development, I'm wanting supporting businesses, whether it's small, local, just economic.
and I'm right there with her. I'm not trying to discount what the public has said, but I feel like the college has that covered very, very good, and they will cover it if somebody needs that.
So both your preference would be to stay with number 5.
Number 1, 3, and 5, that's,
3 and 5.
That's where I'm at.
Okay.
I'm just saying, like, I just don't think that, why I use the word economic development is because I would like it to stay a little bit broader than just supporting local and small businesses. I just think it needs to be supporting businesses. So if you're local and small business and you apply for a grant and you're applying for that economic development bucket, that's where you're gonna apply for the economic, you're gonna apply through that. So the small local businesses have an avenue to apply for the ARPA funds through the economic development bucket. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. So Steve, John, and Jay, where do you fall on this?
I would be okay with broadening the economic development bucket to include ideas or grants for small businesses. I mean, we talked about that, that's something that came up in council today. But I still want it to be open for creative ideas that have to do with workforce development, such as retraining or, I do appreciate your comment that the college already has a workforce development office, and there's a lot of things being done in the state for that as well. But I think that there are local things I'm okay with broadening it, but I want to hold true to the top 3 that the community identified.
Okay, so there's a proposal now to add number 2. Steve?
Let's go to John, let me think about this a minute.
That's fine. John?
I'm gonna stick with 1, 3, 5.
Okay.
1, 3, 5.
Back to Steve.
Well, like I said before, they all come together, so I'll stick with 1, 3, 5 too.
So this is consensus building, not majority rule?
Yeah.
So,
I'm okay with that. I just, I don't want the public to think we don't appreciate their input on workforce development, because everybody's talking, you just talked about the labor shortage.
That's, yeah, okay, so when I come to get grants, we pay people more. I mean, it's not, I'm not developing, there's people out there with skills, it's just, at what price point is it worth, do I sub it out to somebody?
But that's
Or do I
not
hire someone
sustainable,
full-time?
whereas like workforce development of retraining to a higher paying job, I guess. Yeah, I'm curious what we'll see in that bucket number 5, because if it is just direct subsidies, a pile of money,
to a small business for wages, I'm not sure that's.
It's more of, I would think number two would be developing skills that they can't get other places that are specific to an industry. Which that industry, being a small business, could apply for a small business grant under the economic, under number 5, and say, hey, we're gonna use these funds, we got a new piece of machinery, we're gonna train our people on it, we're gonna hire some people on this.
So are you saying you do want the eco bucket to be available for number 2?
It cross-contaminates.
Yeah, maybe two and
I mean, it
five.
cross-contaminates. If someone came in and says, I've got a small business, I've got an application, I'd like you to support me, part of these funds are gonna go towards some development of skills, I'm gonna say, sorry, that falls under number 2, we don't have any interest in that. I'm not saying it's excluded,
Okay.
I'm just saying it could be a portion of another bucket. Another, yeah.
And that kind of goes off of what I was trying to explain earlier, is that I think, I'm just trying to get this right, that the executive summary has 2 and 5 here in 2 different buckets. I think what we're saying is we would just like an economic development bucket that captures both those spirits.
Yeah, exactly, broadens it to.
Yeah. Would you guys agree?
Well said.
Well said?
Yeah.
Yes, we want to, we're creating a new name for a new bucket that is kind of a combination of 2 and 5, which would be our, This is all bucket number 25.
Okay, focus on small business that captures number 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so those 3. Now, the last thing is to come up with the criteria. So right now, we've got 3. The 2 of our priorities, sustainability, deep and narrow. And the only one that I think, looking at this, we haven't talked about is the collaborative groups or individual organizations. Do both, do one.
I think you should be open to both.
I think we should be open to both, but boy, howdy, I think our impact would be greater if we forced collaboration across organizations. Not necessarily in bucket number, I think bucket 2 and 5, that's going to be tough. But when you're dealing with issues of housing, I would like to see our SHODOs working with our housing commission, working with our churches, working, or, you know what I mean?
So you could rate those higher, but not eliminate individual organizations. So back to the weighting thing. So the 2 weights were, or the weight was, I'm not going to put it up here, but it was a collaborative. That would get a weight of whatever.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can handle it that way too. That's just one way. Absolutely not. Absolutely your decision.
So we're creating a rubric that say if it's housing, which is a little bit down further on the weight than childcare, if it's a collaboration, it can climb a couple steps higher. And then you're comparing these applications when they come in. Yeah. I think that's important.
That's kind of how we did it on the HCF grants.
Yeah. I would like that to be a part of the weight rubric collaboration. Is anybody else in agreement with that?
I think it's a factor.
Yeah, and it doesn't eliminate one organization coming to you, and if it's a darn hot proposal and they've got 3 out of the cover, 3 out of the 4, if that's what you're end up with, then
It's collaborative, but lends more value for the community as a whole.
All right. You don't have to come up with a boatload of criteria. Right now we've got 4.
I think sustainability is a top priority. Collaboration and impact.
We have that, but we also have
2 or more. I should hit 2 or more. I should put here, and this feels mostly like it, well, no, you can, I think,
Is it a long-term impact or a short-term impact?
well,
And
that's a
that-
different, yeah, that's a different one here. So
And that
that's-
could get rated differently.
So this, I got it written here, as short-term recovery or long-term change. So that could be a way to distinguish it too, versus another way to define impact. I mean, I really see that impact, long-term change is really sustainability. I think you've got it covered.
Okay.
I think you've got it covered. Because sustainability means you're going to have sustainability means long-term impact.
The other one I was thinking of is, I don't know if this would be worth it or not, but is this sole funding or is this part of a larger funding? Are there one or two other sources being used? Because if there are, to me, that gives more credibility to the proposal being put to the table. You know, we've got funding. We're asking for 30% of our total funding, this gap, to be filled by these ARPA funds for this one-time big project.
And another way that grant makers say that is, if we only gave you 30% of your budget, would you still do this project? So that would be another way to say.
What funds do they have committed, what funds are they requesting?
That's usually there, yeah, that's.
CRP or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So funds committed.
Versus the funds being requested.
And that would be weighted, just in case of like, if there's like a small daycare who might not really have the availability for, they can still submit an application.
Right, but if someone came to the table and they said, you know, we've got $600,000 from the state, and we got $300,000 from school system, we're looking for another $250 for this huge program
Yeah.
that encompasses all
That gets
this.
weighted higher.
That's deep and impactful, and
Yep.
that's a
Yep.
big piece of the pie.
Okay.
So I'm seeing tired faces out there. Understandably so. This is a long day, I know I could get up from the work tomorrow. I think that the criteria here is, you guys, is really workable, because if you get down to more operational kinds of things with grant making, matrix and decision, there's a plethora of resources for that. And if you give it to the community foundation, they know exactly how to break that up. So if these are the most important things for you guys, then I think we're probably good with that, unless you have a burning one that you want to get out there yet.
So my question to you is, when do we decide these other things that need to be in place before we can get the ball rolling on finalizing the grant process and getting the money?
Yeah, that's a good question. The number one is going to be partner or no partner. Who's that partner going to be? I think that's number one. Then you, I mean, if it's the community foundation, let's say you choose that. They agree, you choose them, you're fine with what they're going to charge or whatever, okay? Then they're going to do the timeline, they're going to do due dates. You can say, we need to have all these funds committed by December 2024. That's your requirement. And then they can line out the timeline, bring it back. I mean, they're basically your contractor. Whoever you pick to do that, then you approve it. So I don't think, first of all, you need to make that decision first, and then those other things will come into play.
So,
You would suggest.
yeah, so we would direct staff to start reaching out tomorrow, and then you would work on making that not so rough. So that we have a clear,
That's clear to the community.
that's clear to the community, right? And that way we can talk to the, so I'm just asking here. Can we say staff? We start reaching out tomorrow. We've got a rubric, we've got our buckets, we've got our percentages of what we're funding. This is what's going down.
Austin will be shocked and surprised, don't you think?
And then you can get back to us by the next city council meeting?
I like meeting every other day for that.
I know, we're meeting like the 14th. I mean, yeah, I think that's ample time to identify a partner, but that's because I'm not the one doing it, right?
And remember the statement earlier that I saw Mr. Brown shake his head, doesn't have to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, but I'm gonna go back to Jay. I would like a process laid out so people can start applying as soon as possible. I don't want this to trail out and at the 5th hour, a year from now, oh, we're deciding to take applications now, and then we're rushing to encumber the money. I think it's an urgent need that we have this process laid out so that people can start applying by August, by June. You know what I'm saying? I would like it theoretically, it probably will be August, you know, but that's what I would like to see.
When is the childcare study coming out? Is that August or September?
It'll be September.
Okay, September.
And maybe I'm being naive, I'm not completely scared of the 5 of us being the grant committee and meeting, not every week, not every month, but saying grant application deadline is September 30th. And we're gonna meet October, whatever it is, for the first round of grant applications. And then we, the 5 of us, if you came up with this, choose how the grant funds are put out. Not putting on city staff, not putting it on a partner organization. I don't know if I'm scared of that, but the 4 of you should steer me in the right direction on that. And I'm not scared of, Hutch Community Foundation partnering with us and all that. I'm just saying, sometimes we gotta do, we're tasked with it, Is it worth us doing it or farming it out?
What do you think they'll charge?
I don't know. I know it won't be, I can't imagine it'd be a significant portion of the $3 million.
Then would we be charged with the reporting process and the oversight and the compliance as well?
Aren't we kind of on the hook for, since it was supposed to be put out there by city council to make the decision, as someone on the hook for compliance anyway?
It's my understanding from the auditor will still be responsible for the audit on it. So you wouldn't want to just give it to anybody, but our proven relationship with Foundation is one that we're already encumbered by that review.
Yeah, I guess I was just saying, like, let's take an example, like broadband. Because broadband development has 2 staff. They contract with Widow Bryan, an emergency response consultant, for reporting and compliance. State's still ultimately responsible for the federal funds being used in the manner that Treasury guidelines outline. But then you have all these other resources, which could be community foundation, whoever, to make sure those who are well-versed in these guidelines, to make sure that the reporting is taken care of, the compliance is, within guidelines. I'm okay doing with the granting authority. I mean, I'm not trying to shirk that, but I think that there's a little bit more involved, and maybe the city's ready to take on that piece of it, because ultimately, they're either taking it on secondhand or they're taking it on directly.
Aren't they gonna be taking on the city portion of it anyway? Not to add more stuff.
If you want to get an idea as to how this is working for some other cities that are doing it that way, I've been watching the meetings to see how it's hitting their agendas, kind of like a freight train. And nobody has this figured out really well. And it will occupy a lot of your agenda time at the podium. And when you're sitting here right now in the context of this broad discussion, you aren't going to realize that the 15 or 20 applications that come in that make perfect sense that we didn't discuss tonight. We get the heartstrings start tugging, and man, this just really makes sense. Why didn't we figure that out that night? Let's change the rules and do this. And it just starts to break down. I have a lot of confidence in this group that wouldn't happen, that there's so much pressure that's applied to those 6 or 7, in this case, 11 commissioners. and it's just a
Yeah, speaking of that, and I'm wishy-washy, I know this, there is a benefit if we were to farm it out.
Yeah.
That the open comments from the audience wouldn't be burying us with, hey, I know this isn't on the agenda, but you guys funded this and I don't agree with it.
Absolutely.
I also think that, like the comment I made earlier wasn't to denigrate our group, but if you divorce decision-making from the political process, I think better ideas rise to the top because you're making decisions based on rubrics and reason and data and less on the emotional. So again, I'm fine doing it, but I do think it's going to be really difficult to keep it objective. Not that any group is going to be not politically, motivated by some respects.
We have an economic development aspect to this. So small businesses could be asking for funds. Do they have to follow federal procurement guidelines? Since it's a federal grant, going to the state, going to us. That's how it is with the base grants. You have to follow federal procurement guidelines for the base grants.
Yes, to some extent. I would have to look at how much, but like, if we're going to give money to even like the foundation to distribute it, we would have to have a sub-recipient agreement with them that says here are all the federal guidelines, just how you can spend ARPA, this is the CFDA number, and have all that language in it. So we would have to have those types of agreements. It kind of depends on what they're spending it on.
But like you're wondering if, for instance, the person who came to us this morning wanted to put in an elevator and got a grant for it, would they have to pay prevailing wages?
Well, the Davis-Bacon wages
Exactly.
don't count as far as the state has put forth. But yet still, as far as the federal procurement guidelines, putting emphasis on women and minority-owned contractors if you can. I think it's 200,000 or 250,000, anything above that you have to put up for bid. And you have to go through the bid process. Now, I would imagine most stuff on the economic development, small business will probably be under 250,000. I'm just saying it's something to be aware of if we have a big ask, and not to get ourselves in trouble.
Another vote for Monica.
Right? Yeah. Pass the responsibilities.
I'll send you a link to the video. It's rather prestigious city, and I just.
What are you doing in Nexus?
Pardon the expression, we're shooting down.
Yeah, it's a whole lot from like 130,000, so.
Yeah. All right, I guess what I would ask everybody is that we ask city staff here what we want. Can you make up a rubric and contact outside agencies like community foundation or.
Sarah, why are you yelling?
Am I yelling?
Yeah, no.
And
already had
and
some
then
conversation.
bring back both proposals to the city council next meeting
Should be so excited to hear from us.
of what what it might look like if we kept it in-house. Which I don't think it should be council, I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree with that. Whether it's.
You guys want to follow the item on the agenda for the next council meeting for this? Can we just put it that way?
But I don't want it to just be a little update. I want it to,
Well, we can't make agreements anyway. We're going to bring that back to you all to do that.
yeah. But shine this, you two, shine this out. Talk to the community partners and get back to us at the next.
Here's the deal, she's here by her own graciousness, she's volunteering her time. So we don't
God
have.
bless you, Lynette.
I know,
Yes.
thank you. We don't have her encumbered under contract, so
Yeah.
for tonight, thank you very much. She's under no obligation to serve the city, but thank you.
Would you be willing to shine that out with,
Shine it out, I'm not sure.
make it nice and.
Well, Bill doesn't need to make anything nice, you saw what I did for the rubric.
I would just like something
I will-
there on size.
I will put this together in the report.
Thank you, that's what I'm asking.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So I say one thing, just to keep in mind that there are already community partners working on at least a couple of the things you've identified. And so, and as you think about partners, United Way's been giving out grants for 80 years here in the community,
Oh, yeah,
along
yeah.
with the Community Foundation. So the partners could, we've already discussed, if we were granted funding, that we could set up those kind of processes for grant making to happen. So keep in mind that Community Ready has already talked a little bit about this, and we can sit down together, Community Foundation, us, and we're all part of what's called K-Ready, which is kindergarten readiness for real.
It's almost, you can almost put an RFQ out for it, to be honest.
I say sold to the lady in the second row.
Well, yeah, because United Way, I mean, it wouldn't be United.
I think,
Or does it have to go?
I think we go through
one of the things you've got,
the partners together. I think we
one of the things you've got to be careful with going to a coalition where you have one of three. I mean, if you've already kind of set up some dynamics there that.
Potential conflict of interest.
Totally. Because you've got economic development and housing, and you already talked about two funding priority areas, so I would caution you on getting into a coalition that's going to receive a lot of your funding.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, but I think that's a real conflict.
We can talk about that.
We can, but I would caution that.
Just request for a proposal.
Okay. What do you guys want to do? Foundation, RFQ, or another organization?
RFQ.
I would put RFQ.
RFQ.
What's an RFQ?
Request for quote.
Qualifications and quote.
RFQ.
If,
Oh.
ask Audrey about what she thinks it would take in administrative costs. If they were handled.
She didn't seem to be very excited about the idea, but maybe she's warmed to it over the last few months. You probably talked to her just because I had, this was a couple of months ago.
I never had that news, it was a bad day to ask her.
No, I think we have people in the community that would take the mantle on, not excited about it, but knowing how important it is for the community. And sometimes they might be the right person, even if they don't want to be the right person.
I say we put it out.
I'd be okay with that, see what comes up.
We're local. Okay.
Yeah, we're local.
Okay.
Well, I just want to thank Lynette and
Thank
her
you.
service and everything she did to help the task force, and then spending all this time. You're so patient.
You have
Exactly what we needed.
You're going to tell my husband that?
Yeah. You wait, you spend all your patience on us.
That's right.
Thanks a lot for that.
You're welcome, I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Your
everybody.
input and you being so willing, as Lisa said, to take this all into consideration. I think you have honored, as you were saying, Steve, you have honored the input that the citizens had. Okay, so thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you